evening. Not fast numbers tonight, but everybody looks good. Yay! So, even Robert looks good. Maybe I better get my glasses checked. We do welcome you to this is still October meeting of the White County Historical Society. And one thing that I want to, well, several things need to do here. One, we appreciate two different Walkers. Will Walker is on-hand videotaping for us. He's been here 3 or 4 months now, and he is really helping us out on it. So we'll thank you much. Terry Walker is hidden over here in the corner, and if you happen to get the ball and all banner, he was in the paper last week. Sherry Snow did a feature article on Terry, and he is a walking encyclopedia on folkways. So if you got something that ails you or aches a little bit, talk to Terry and he'll tell you what the old folk cure is. Also, if you don't want to know how to cook poke salad or get your turnip greens ready or anything along that line, talk to Terry. Terry, you will talk to him, won't you?
Yep.
Whatever comes up. So, but we appreciate you. Terry did, Sherry Snow did a beautiful article on Pioneer Village and Terry in the last edition of the paper, and it was just really neat. So Terry's been here before, Will's been here before, but we appreciate, they're both, last name's Walker. Someday they'll have to find out that they're 16th cousins probably. So. But anyway, the other thing that I want to announce simply before I forget it, next month is election of officers for the coming year, and our slate that will be nominated, I'll be up for president. Actually, I'm on the board right now. I'm going to digress a minute. Mary Beth, I talked to last week, she is on a half-day work schedule now. They continue to do testing on heart. They don't have answers yet. As we've kind of mentioned off and on at meetings, there's been a lot of, there's been several different illnesses in the family, and then a wedding to add to the fun, and a car accident. They're telling a part of her life may just be too much stress. But anyway, they're still doing some testing with Mary Beth, so she's not with us tonight. But anyway, she will, I'll be the nominee for president next year. Sam Holloway will be our vice presidential nominee. Shelley for secretary up here in the corner, and then Georgia Rogers. Hey Georgia, you're in a different spot. Where's Carl tonight? At home. Okay. Carl has been on the World War II veterans trip though since the last meeting. Had a big time, I hear. May still be recuperating.
He's over that.
So, and then our 2 board members that are up for re-election this year are Leroy Blair and Scott Akridge. So that the election will be next month, and if you have any nominations from the floor, well, feel free. Other groups are doing things. I don't know if we have anyone here from the Arts Council or not. Don't see anyone right offhand. Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't represent them, but I'm a member and I'm the literary chair of the committee.
Okay, and I know they have a new exhibit.
They do, and it's excellent. It is excellent.
Okay. I should remember the names because I got the card, but I don't have it offhand. But I did see some examples, and it's the type artwork I like.
It is.
It's, I think, definitely worth a visit. Tom, on Sons of Confederate Veterans, I know y'all are staying busy. Don't know how much you want to share with the group, but at least tell us you're existing and when you're meeting and anything else you want to tell us.
We're going to be at the village this coming weekend. We'll be camping out up there.
Okay.
We did a great community fest last weekend, and then we've got on the 9th of November, we've got a memorial we're going to do at Concord.
A memorial at Concord, this will be like a graveside type thing? Dedication of a marker probably, I'm guessing? Okay, I know y'all have stayed busy. You have been to some event every week this year, I bet, on average.
It's pretty busy.
Yeah, stay with it. So, the other thing coming up is Pioneer Village coming up this weekend. And Elizabeth, you can only have 5 minutes.
Oh dear, I better just sit down. Well, things are very busy at the village. We have, if you're involved with the Pioneer Village open house coming up, put your hand up. So, see, we've got Put that hand up.
I'll change that back there.
We've got quite a few in the room that will be there. We're looking for a large crowd. Now, I've prayed long and hard about this for good weather. Bad weather is not permissible. It is not acceptable. So I saw the weather forecast before I came, and although it's going to rain the middle part of the week, it looks like it's moving on out. 72 degrees Saturday and Sunday and sunny. So you need to come out and see us. We'll be there Saturday from 10 to 4 and Sunday 1 to 4. I still have a couple of slots vacant. Need someone to tell about the strawberry shed. If you can do that, just come on out. You can help us out. Need help with the bonnets and also the wash pot. Showing children how to wash clothes on the old washboard and rinsing them out in the wash pot.
Hey Elizabeth, what were the hours again?
Saturday 10 to 4, Sunday 1 to 4.
Okay, thank you.
I have some flyers here about the open house, and I would ask that you take one. If you go to a morning group where you drink coffee, take some with you and pass them out. Take them to church with you Wednesday night and pass them out. If you've got Bible study this week, take some and pass them out to help spread the word. So I'll just put them up here on this front table, and they'll be available after the meeting.
Also, if you happen to, they've tried to get them on most of the community announcement bulletin boards. You know, a lot of the stores have an area where you can post things, or post offices kind of don't always work with you on that. Some do and some don't. But anyway, if you think of a public place that you could take one and stick it up, well, feel free. You got plenty.
One thing else, we were selected to be featured on the State of Arkansas Tourism website. I sent a link to our Pioneer Village Friends group. If you haven't seen it, it's not only listed on the calendar, they have a feature article on their monthly newsletter about Pioneer Village and Searcy in general. So,
And this is really turning into, I've talked to civic clubs over the years, and I mentioned White County does not have a state park. So we had Pioneer Village, we didn't have a museum. And so we really do not have a tourist attraction in the county. And Pioneer Village is really continuing to grow. I remember last fall, we had somewhere around 1,500 over the day and a half. I don't know the exact number, but I mean, our attendance just keeps coming, keeps growing. And so if you are in the mood to just come out and walk around and look authentic, well, Cheryl, aren't you in charge of the costumes?
No.
Oh, Elizabeth is? Okay. Anyway, we can put you in costume if you would like to just come out and be part of the atmosphere. You may have never felt like you were part of the atmosphere before, but this is your opportunity. So, are there any other clubs or activities that we need to mention? I feel like we're leaving some group out. I guess not. One of the things I asked in the newsletter, if anyone had any mementos or stories, have to keep them very brief with their stories, on World War I. Did anybody bring anything from World War I era? Okay, no takers on that, but anyway, we appreciate the thought on it. Program tonight had to do, Veterans Day will be on, I think this year the official Veterans Day and the old time Veterans Day fall together, if I remember correctly. Who in here are veterans from World War II era? I think, do you know what you World War II?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Leon's not here tonight.
Yes,
Oh, Leon's back here. Okay, hiding on us.
Okay.
Okay. Talking about the World War II veterans, Leon, you qualify, don't you?
Yeah.
You've made the trip to Washington. Carl, if he is here in World War II. Who do we have from Korea, the Korean era? Cold War era. Korean, I'm missing somebody. Oh, over here, I'm sorry. Okay. Cold War era, and then Vietnam, several of us get to qualify on that. Robert does, Dewey. So, and then Stan, okay. So we do want to recognize our veterans, and anybody more recent than that era? Okay, well, World War I, it kind of disappointed me about 3 years ago. I'm going to get a little political here, and I try not to do that, but our last World War I veteran passed away about 3 years ago. Congress was so tied up with their business, they couldn't let him lie in state in the Capitol like they normally do with the last, and it just irked me. It just still bothers me when I think about it, but I won't assign either party to that, because I want to give both parties plenty of blame on that. But anyway, it's an era that's, of course, is past, but our speaker tonight, I had not met before, but he works for an agency that I think the world of. How many of you at some time have been to the Arkansas History Commission behind the Capitol? If you haven't, go. You'll spend hours. There's no end to what you can find that's intriguing in the Arkansas History Commission. And so Brian Irby is with the Arkansas History Commission, holds a BA and MA in history from UCA. That's where I have my MA from, so two of us can claim that. Currently pursuing a master's degree in public history at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And his topic will be Arkansas and the First World War. Lecture will explore the experiences of Arkansans as the U.S. went to war in 1917. It will deal with the building of Camp Pike, the first Army training base in the state, the experience of the draft, and the lives of ordinary soldiers in the First World War. So let's give a warm welcome to Brian Irby, Arkansas History.
Well, thanks for coming. So, as we are now entering into the month of November, and one of the first holidays of the season, Veterans Day, might be forgotten by many that at one time this holiday was called Armistice Day. It has always been November 11th, but at one time it was meant to commemorate the end of what was called at the time the Great War. This war could be thought of as the original forgotten war. Maybe the passage of time has blotted out its memory, or maybe it's the fact that the United States was in the war for such a short time. But I think we should pause for a few moments and think about this war and the impact that it had upon this state. While it is remembered more prominently in Europe, you can hardly visit a village in England or France without finding a World War I monument. It has been largely forgotten in this country. So tonight I'm going to give you a small glimpse into the war and to the experiences of many Arkansans who served in it. By April of 1917, when the United States officially declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary, the war had already been going strong for 3 years. Millions had already perished in the war. It was a war where men would fight for months over just a few miles of land. In fact, if you look at the battle lines as they stood on 1914 and where it ended up in at the end of in November of 1918, you find that very little progress had taken place either way. It was a war of attrition. So in April of 1917, the United States officially entered the war, and as a result, there was a definite need to awaken the sleeping nation and get it mobilized for war. It became clear to authorities at the first of 1917 that the Army, as it stood, would not be enough to fight the war. As a result, the government passed the Selective Service Act of 1917, which required all men 18 to 30 to register for the draft. The federal government set June the 5th of 1917 as the official registration day and encouraged all state and local governments to make the day a grand patriotic spectacle. In accordance with these wishes, Arkansas Governor Charles Hillman Bruff issued a proclamation declaring Draft Day a state holiday. He urged that all Arkansans take part in the festivities. As a part of the parades and other showings of patriotism, he urged all churches statewide to set an hour during the day devoted to prayer. Quote, "To the Most High God, that victory may crown our forces on land and sea, and that the world may be redeemed, regenerated, and disenthralled by the irresistible genius of a universal emancipation, and that permanent peace may be established among the nations of the earth, where there are human rights to respect." But according to the proclamation, this was a fight for freedom worldwide. Quote, "I respectfully urge every eligible citizen, tingling with the pride of those who know that the day has come when America is privileged to spend her blood, her money, and her might for the principles that gave her birth and happiness, and the peace which she has treasured, to be alert and to register promptly on this day." Commerce played a large part in the drive to have the training camp in central Arkansas. The head of the Little Rock Chamber of Commerce, George Furman, personally visited General Pershing, the commander of the U.S. Expeditionary Forces, and laid out the case for Arkansas. Once chosen, L.B. Sheridan of the United States Quartermaster Office immediately set out to design the camp. He appointed Colonel George P. Howell to assist. Since Sheridan expected as many as 38,000 soldiers to training at the camp at any one time, the camp would need to be rather large, and construction would be a challenge. Sheridan estimated that the camp would require as much as 29 million feet of lumber. But while the main challenge of building the camp loomed, Sheridan thought the main challenge was fighting the great and familiar Arkansas pest, the mosquito, in order to prevent malaria from spreading among the building crews. When choosing names for camps nationwide, a board of officers from the Army decided to stick with names that would represent regional interests. For instance, the camp established at Rockford, Illinois, was named Camp Grant after the Civil War general who led an Illinois unit at the beginning of the war. Likewise, the board wanted a name that would reflect a hero to men from the states that the camps would serve: Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi. The board chose Camp Pike, named after the early 19th century explorer Zebulon Pike, who was responsible for exploring the southwestern parts of the Louisiana Territory. Once the plans were set for the camp, workers began feverishly constructing the buildings. Hundreds of local plumbers, construction engineers, water engineers, and road crews set out busily to build Camp Pike. Due to the fact that often construction was slow, recruits began streaming into camp before the barracks were even constructed. Often the new recruits had to sleep outside on cots while proper barracks were being erected. Planners for the camp needed a nearby hotel for officers' wives and visiting dignitaries. Although the camp was near Little Rock, the camp was still inconvenient. Near the camp, however, was St. Joseph's Orphanage, owned by the Catholic Church. W.G. Hutton, a camp trustee, negotiated with Bishop John B. Morris of the Little Rock Diocese for military use of the building. The 162 orphans who had currently been living there were ushered away to stay at Little Rock College. The building cost $200,000 to repurpose from an orphanage into a hotel. Nevertheless, the building opened as a hotel in the winter of 1970. In 1916, it was clear that the United States would likely enter the war. As a planning measure, President Woodrow Wilson established the National Council of Defense to coordinate planning, food production, and other war measures. Additionally, each state established its own council for defense at the state level. In Arkansas, General Lloyd England became chair of Arkansas's council. He appointed county supervisors to oversee each county's effort. Among their duties was to make sure that Arkansans bought Liberty bonds and took part in food rationing programs. One of the plans of the State Council of Defense was to organize a Liberty Loan Sunday event whereby every church in Arkansas was asked to have a special service to promote Liberty bonds. The church program would feature the congregation being given American flags while listening to the preacher preach a sermon promoting Liberty bonds. Ellis Parker Butler sent a poem to the Helena World newspaper to demonstrate the importance of everyone taking part in the Liberty Loan program. He wrote, quote, "Young Jimmy Dale across our street is just a gawky lad. He grew so fast the doctor said his heart was mighty bad. They wouldn't let him do much work or any hardy play, but just the same they drafted him, and Jim has gone away." Jim was a sort of great big kid and fooling all the while, so when they ordered him to the camp, he went there with a smile. Jim Dale is in the Army now, lank legs, bum heart and all, to fight like other drafted men that got the country's call. God, yes, Jim's heart may drop him dead, or he may live to be shot all to pieces over there. What odds to you or me? By thunder, it's these odds to you. If kids like Jim can go, with smiles to fight our wars for us, we can put up the dough. If we can buy a bond or two and don't, while Jim, poor cuss, goes smiling off to death or wounds, then hell's too good for us. Governor Bruff's wife organized a women's group to organize women's efforts during the war. Despite the growing sense of patriotism in the country, there were still many who were skeptical of the efficacy of the United States entering the war. After all, this was a war taking place in Europe, and American interests did not seem to be affected. One Arkansan, a student at Harvard University, wrote home to a skeptical father in McCrory, Arkansas, explaining the need for the United States to enter the war. Quote, "You must realize that the rights and liberties we now enjoy have corresponding duties. People before us died to protect those principles we believe in, and we must protect them. You ran away from Russia to a free country and were received openly and given a chance to live. If it were not for the principles of democracy, I would be in Siberia or the army instead of Harvard now. Then appealing to him on a practical matter, he wrote, quote, "When ships are sunk, it affects McCrory vitally. Where do you think the cotton goes? If Germany could blockade England, your cotton would sell for 4 cents a pound, and people in McCrory would starve instead of getting 20 cents. What affects one concerns all, but war is not fought for money's sake, because our rights are things inherent and can't be bought with money." Officials worried that African Americans would not likely register for the draft. After all, this was coming during a period that historians have called the nadir of American race relations. The editor of the Conway Log Cabin Democrat wrote in 1917, addressing African American readers, quote, "You are an American citizen, and it is your duty to be loyal to this country. You own property, pay taxes, enjoy our inalienable rights under the Constitution. Hence, it is imperative that each should do his bit for the government." Also, rumors were circulating that German agents were attempting to inflame African Americans against the government and the war. Paranoia spread that African Americans were being told by German spies that they would be transported to Mexico, where they would be armed and then brought back to seize land from white farmers. Rumors circulated that several preachers had also been dismissed by their congregations for preaching against the war. D.W.C. Brown, an African American living in Little Rock, wrote to the Arkansas Gazette, quote, "On behalf of the Negroes of the South, North, East, and West, I want to ask that in this time of our country's need, no one doubt the loyalty and patriotism of the Negroes in America. Remember that they have served in soldiers at every battlefield since 1861, covering half the globe, Cuba, the Philippines, Mexico, and have shown themselves to be loyal and brave fighters. The purpose of this communication is to ask that the press of America be fair, and remember that the Negroes of America have never proven disloyal." But despite this show of loyalty, officials in several counties passed laws prohibiting African Americans from meeting in groups. Across the state, June the 5th was registration day, and it was met with parades and patriotic activities. Churches held special patriotic services, and local dignitaries gave speeches as the young men in their towns went to the courthouse to register. In Russellville, the draft day celebrations were highlighted by the spectacle of a 235-pound gorilla who climbed a 65-foot flagpole to the top, where he sat perched on a globe while waving the American flag. There was also some levity on the first draft day. Charles Simmons and his friend Edgar McAllister, both of Fayetteville, worried about whether or not they would be drafted. When the draft numbers were released, Simmons laughed and hurrahed his friend McAllister as McAllister's number 1571 was announced for the draft. However, his laughter soon faded when the corrected number came, and it was his draft number instead. While most people who failed to register for the draft were arrested peacefully, there were some incidents of violence. Probably the most prominent occurrence took place in Cleveland County. The Atkinson family were Jehovah's Witnesses who lived near Heber Springs. Due to their religious beliefs, their sons refused to register for the draft. In 1918, the government did not recognize the status of conscientious objectors, so in their eyes, the Atkinsons were committing a crime by not registering. regardless of their religious faith. As word spread that the sheriff would arrest all Cleveland County men who had refused to register, the number of men gathered at Atkinson's household grew to as many as 30. On Sunday, July the 7th, 1918, Cleveland County Sheriff deputies went to the Atkinson home to arrest the men. A shootout erupted, leaving Porter Hazelwood, one of the deputies, dead, and the father of the Atkinson family, Tom, badly wounded. Seeing that they were outnumbered, the deputies retreated to gather reinforcements. The next day, a company of soldiers from Little Rock arrived with a machine gun. Soon they were joined by a group of 40 men from Searcy and from Judsonia. During the advance, Atkinson and the rest of the Jehovah's Witnesses fled into the countryside, where they hid out for a week while the posse searched for them. The posse brought in relatives of the men to plead for them to surrender themselves. By July the 15th, the final resistors turned themselves in to the government. Although charged with the murder of Porter Hazelwood, the jury only found Tom Atkinson guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and another of the resistors was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Some of the draftees still were determined not to stay in camp. One recruit for Black Rock went so far as to cut off 2 of his fingers from his left hand with an axe in order to get a medical discharge. He claimed that his fingers had been shot off during a drill, but investigators found a bloody hatchet nearby. He was charged and court-martialed for mayhem and sent to the federal penitentiary. Since the construction crews were still feverishly creating the camp by the time the soldiers began to arrive, they found that much of the camp remained incomplete. This made early training exercises difficult. In fact, much of the early training was conducted inside classrooms. Target practice became impossible since construction crews had not completed the firing ranges. Instead, early drills were simply in the care and maintenance of weapons. Soldiers were finally issued Colt 45s once targets were completed. By the spring of 1918, the camp was finally in a state of readiness. However, if you recall from your history books, the war would be over in 6 months. Love seemed to blossom frequently during the first months of the United States' involvement in the war. As soldiers prepared to go to camp, several soldiers quickly married their sweethearts before leaving home. Due to the fact that this would be the first time that many young men, many young country boys had visited the big city, and since the big city could entice young men to a life of vice, state officials made sure to crack down on dens of iniquity. Governor Bruff appointed a group of men called the State Council on the Repression of Vice to travel the state and see that local communities were enforcing the laws regarding prostitution and alcohol. But while statewide enforcement was important, the main job fell upon Little Rock law enforcement due to the fact that the city was just across the river from Camp Pike. With so many young recruits entering into town, it was feared that many of them would be led astray. A.B. Poe, the chairman of the committee, told reporters, quote, "I believe that it is the duty of every self-respecting citizen of Little Rock to bend his best effort toward the suppression of vice in the interest of national efficiency." Mayor Pixley of Argenta, which is now North Little Rock, closed all dance halls near Fort Roots for fear that such places would hamper discipline in the ranks. In an effort to keep the young men's minds off evil activities, camp officials tried to create as many wholesome activities as possible. Raymond B. Fondlick, chairman of the Commission on Training Camp Activities, organized a dance at Fort Roots for camp soldiers. The response was overwhelming as 1,400 soldiers arrived for the dance. Regrettably, though, only to find that 300 women were available. While camp officials worried that the morale of the men in camp, officials also worried about local women being corrupted. One official wrote to the Arkansas Gazette about what he termed the, quote, flapper problem. Quote, there are a great many young girls who must be taken care of in these communities. They are carried away with admiration for the soldiers. It sometimes seems as if they become hysterical at the very sight of brass buttons. Sundays were especially difficult for the soldiers. For years, Little Rock City officials had debated the morality of allowing movie theaters to be open on Sundays. The mayor of Little Rock closed movie theaters on Sundays in early 1917, resulting in young soldiers having little in the way of entertainment. Myron Kesner, who was working for the Commission on Training Camp Activities, became worried that this would lead to, quote, soldiers wandering aimlessly about the streets, where they would, quote, confront imminent possibilities of much danger, not only to the community, but to himself as well. While he was sure that the officials who had closed the theaters had been correct in trying to prevent the morals of soldiers from being corrupted, the plan had been misguided and led to officials actually standing in the way of the War Department's plans. Once in France, the temptations would continue. S. Bundridge, speaker of at the YMCA for Judsonia, told a gathering that the Army YMCA branches had been working to limit the immorality that soldiers might engage themselves in. In this campaign, the YMCA was raising $35 million, and each community should make an effort to donate to the effort. Soldiers at Camp Pike also organized a football team. The team ended up playing many of the state's local colleges, including the Arkansas Razorbacks, whom they defeated pretty easily. Many of the recruits were amazed at the new technological advances that they were witnessing while in training. Remember that this is a time when even air flight was new. Captain Almond Stoop wrote from a training camp in California to the Arkansas Gazette, quote, you probably have never received a letter from an Arkansas boy riding aboard an airplane 2,000 feet in the air. I'm some high right now, but will come down just a little after I pass over a large range of mountains that run for about 25 miles. Many of the recruits were as the war raged in Europe, officials hoped to emphasize the need for civilians to sacrifice on the home front. Ruth Peck McLeod of the University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service wrote in the Judsonia Weekly Advance, quote, every time the household prepares a meal, she is helping to decide just how long this war will last. Instead of spending the time in sentiment thinking of the horror of the war, she had better put her shoulder to the wheel during the holidays. Let the housewives know just how to serve war menus. William Cooksey, the State Council of Defense's food administrator for White County, urged White County citizens to observe wheatless Mondays and Wednesdays. due to the fact that the demand on the front for wheat was growing exponentially, while production was remaining static. Additionally, each family was allowed to purchase no more than 48 pounds of flour a month. Any violation of this law resulted in a penalty. One of the main features of fighting during the First World War was the inception of trench warfare. The new recruits had to train for fighting in the trenches. Recruits trained for fighting in the trenches with bayonets. In order to protect themselves, the recruits were from being stabbed by the bayonets. They were outfitted and padded with padded fencing gear and masks. In other camps, leather bayonets were being used to prevent any injuries, but unfortunately those were not available at Camp Pike. Instead, they used wooden bayonets. During the last half of the 19th century, German immigrants had flooded into the United States. Many of them Catholics who were fleeing anti-Catholic sentiment in Germany. At the beginning of the United States' entry into the First World War, these German Americans found themselves under suspicion as spies for their former homeland. One German immigrant in Fort Smith, John Schmidt, was charged in October of 1917 under suspicion of espionage. The specific charge was that he was disguised as a salesman, and while making his rounds, obtained information, quote, to prevent, hinder, and delay the execution of the laws to prepare and carry on the war. Furthermore, police found in his possession lists of other German Americans with whom he carried on, quote, seditious communications. Kurt Ackerman, editor of the German language newspaper in Little Rock, the Staatszeitung, was charged with obstructing enlistments by publishing pro-German propaganda in his paper. With the rising suspicion, an organization of German Americans in Arkansas released a resolution to the press affirming their allegiance to the United States. August Seymour, a Danish immigrant living in Little Rock, was arrested for, quote, being a German sympathizer and making pro-German speeches on the street corners of the city. Police searched Seymour and found his bags full of books on science and astronomy. Nevertheless, he was going to be held by authorities until his true motivations were revealed. Another Little Rock resident, Paul Coucher, son of German immigrants, was arrested for making threats against President Woodrow Wilson. According to witnesses, he exclaimed that, quote, this patriotism makes me tired. I'm going back to Germany. Furthermore, he said that if he were drafted, he would desert. Although he disputed the charges, officials still arrested him for his threats against the president. For more than mere words, some German Arkansans sought to serve in the Army as a means of proving their patriotism. Arthur Phillips, a sales clerk at Gus Blass's department store in Little Rock, wanted to prove that although his German-born mother's family was still living in Germany, he was fully an American. His mother declared to the Arkansas Gazette that if it came to a choice between his German relatives and his country, he would certainly pick his country. Nevertheless, the federal government passed a law requiring all Germans in America who were not naturalized to relinquish all weapons, avoid being near train tracks or any boat or watercraft. Additionally, air travel was also prohibited by law. Furthermore, Germans were not permitted to come within a half mile of Little Rock or the training camp unless they had a permit. Americans were certainly under suspicion, Arkansans were also on the lookout for the enemy within. Local officials were told by the State Council of Defense to be on the lookout for draft resistors. Local officials were told that the people in remote sections of Arkansas were being stirred up against the war by people, quote, preaching a vicious propaganda, alleging that this war was brought on by the capitalists to be fought by the toiling masses. Merely being critical of American policy would also bring people under suspicion. Once training was complete, it was time for the soldiers to go to Europe. Understandably, many of the soldiers were nervous about the future. Also understandable was the fact that many of the boys' parents were also nervous. Lieutenant James Cook of Texarkana wrote to his parents the night before deployment, hoping to soothe his parents' worries. Quote, now don't worry, don't allow any blood and thunder rumor to alarm you about any dangers befalling me. I know and believe bad news travels fast. The adjutant general and his wife will let you know if I get hurt. So don't believe any rumors. I fully believe that we will not see any actual fighting for at least 3 months, and maybe not until next spring, and maybe not at all. If we do have any fighting, I want you to know I will be in it. I'll be doing my work tooth and nail. If I don't come back, you will nevertheless have just cause for gratification. If I do come back, I'll have seen actual service. I'll be somebody. Many of the soldiers in France wrote home glowing reports as if they were tourists on vacation. H. Grady Craig, a soldier from El Dorado, wrote to his aunt that he was enjoying a picnic on the grounds of a hotel that Napoleon built. Quote, today for dinner I had veal cutlet, spring onions, radishes, lettuce, potatoes, and milk, not buttermilk like you used to serve me. And it cost me 2 francs, about 38 cents. And eggs over here are as plentiful as flies. Once in a while I indulge in eating a big crab or craw, or as Mr. Dellinger would say, a lobster. Corporal Wayne Clark of Little Rock wrote home to his parents that fighting was going just fine in France. He wrote the, quote, the Heinies, which was a word for Germans, did not have much time to get away, so we captured the majority of them. As a rule, they seem pleased and think they are going to be sent to America, but some of them are square-headed Prussians who think that the world is wrong because it is round. While many wrote of the joys of being in a foreign land, there were plenty who wrote of the hell of battle. Corporal John Sandy wrote home to his father, painting a rather grim scene. Quote, the German lays down one hell of a barrage. I can tell you that there are snipers at every place. Machine guns are his main weapons, and he knows how to use them. That battlefield was like the doors of hell, and men went mad. We were just in advance of the barrage and keeping in touch with the lads ahead. After 5 days of it and completely exhausted, I crawled into quarters. I had lost weight and my clothes were in rags. Many of my friends sleep never to rise again. God rest their souls. It is very hard to write, though, as the scenes still swirl through my brain and I rave in my sleep. While the horrors of war would bring many Arkansans into field hospitals, some found their stays in the hospitals to be quite pleasant. One soldier from Conway was visiting a hospital in order to get a bad tooth pulled, but had a hard time wanting to leave. Quote, I stayed there mostly all the time just to talk with them good-looking nurses, he wrote. one old boy went around singing, quote, "I don't want to get well, I'm in love with a lovely nurse." I didn't blame him, for the little Miss McCall from Virginia sure looked good to me. But soon I had to return to my station, and now all the girls I ever see around here are those who wear wooden shoes, no hose and cape to match the hose. One forgotten aspect of the war was the outbreak in 1918 of the Spanish flu. It was a worldwide epidemic that was likely responsible for millions of deaths. One estimate was that more soldiers died from the flu than from battle. A nasty feature of the flu is that it does not affect those who are usually victims of the flu, the very young and the very old. Instead, it makes the immune system work harder than it usually would, resulting in pneumonia. In fact, the better the immune system, the worse the outcome as the disease uses the body against itself. Wartime diseases are usually hard to defeat due to the constant movement and close quarters of soldiers. It also meant that a disease could spread much more quickly than in peacetime. The disease hit Camp Pike in the fall of 1918, resulting in sickness throughout the camp. One soldier from Camp Pike was responsible for spreading the flu to other parts of the state. James Henson was on leave in the towns of Hazen and DeQueen, where he transmitted the disease. Furthermore, further upstate, a doctor in Randolph County on the other side of the state claimed that as many as 20 cases of the flu could be directly tied to Mr. Henson. When he returned to Camp Pike and learned that he was responsible for the deaths, or for these cases, he attempted suicide. He survived his attempt and then was court-martialed, given a dishonorable discharge, and sentenced to 5 years in federal penitentiary. As the Spanish flu made its rounds through each camp, soldiers who were forced to stay in the camp because of the quarantine found themselves growing restless. All soldiers were prohibited from any social activities. Some soldiers took advantage of the quarantine to make a fast buck. Knowing that those who were quarantined were not allowed out, even to purchase mailing supplies, several soldiers snuck out of the barracks and broke into the YMCA building and stole several letters with YMCA stationery. Then they sold these items to those in quarantine at wildly inflated prices. One White County recruit in training at Camp Beauregard in Louisiana wrote to the editor of the Judsonian Weekly Advance that he was growing increasingly bored and staying in the ranks. In addition to the quarantine, Camp Pike officials built 120 huts in the woods to isolate those who were among the showing flu symptoms in the rest of the camp. As soldiers' spirits began to flag during the Spanish flu epidemic, medical and field officers attempted to cheer them up. They organized, quote, cheer-up wagons that were stationed throughout the camp, where soldiers would perform vaudeville acts and musical shows for each other. On November the 11th, 1918, the war ended. Parades of soldiers, civilians, politicians, and wives streamed into the cities and towns throughout the state, resulting in a patriotic euphoria that would be unmatched until the end of the Second World War. With the end of the war, counties across the state began erecting monuments to those who had fought and died in the war. One county official, when asked why the drive for building monuments was coming so soon after the close of the war, told reporters at the Arkansas Democrat, quote, "Why wait until years have passed and leave the work for future generations?" He said he found a growing sentiment among the citizens of the state to leave a lasting monument to the memory of those who had given so much for their country. Before I close, I want to highlight one Arkansan who served during the war, Herman Davis of Manila, Arkansas. Davis was a farm boy from Manila, short of stature, not physically imposing in any manner. When the war broke out, he, like so many others, was drafted into the service. He did his duty and then came home to Manila to continue with his life. He never spoke of his time during the war. One day, however, the local paper ran an advertisement for war memorabilia, and it featured General Pershing, who gave a list of the 10 most important soldiers who served. Near the top of the list was Davis's name. Townspeople thought, surely this couldn't be our Herman Davis. He is short and certainly does not look like a war hero. When pressed about the matter, Davis reluctantly went out to his tool shed and emerged with a tackle box. When he opened it, friends and family were astonished to find several medals, including the prestigious Croix de Guerre, issued to him by the French government for his service. While accounts differ as to his exploits during the war, nevertheless, his efforts were instrumental to the cause. According to accounts, he only wore his medals on one occasion in public, preferring to leave the war behind him. The story, however, did not end very well for Davis. In 1920, he developed tuberculosis as a result of being caught during a poison gas attack during the war. He died soon after, penniless. His family could not even afford to buy him a tombstone. Soon after his death, though, his story came to the attention of others. He quickly raised the money for him to have a monument in his honor. The fountain in front of the old State House was dedicated in his honor as well. Today, a state park near his hometown also bears his name. While this war has been largely forgotten by today's generations, let's not forget the sacrifices that men like Davis gave. Are there any questions?
I've got one right off the bat. Every picture you've used, does it come out of the History Commission?
A lot of them do. A lot of them do. A lot of the pictures of Camp Pike do.
Just are beautiful photography.
Mm-hmm.
Really neat. Who has a World War I member of your family that, of course, they're gone by now, but any particular names, Dewey?
Yeah, my granddad was a World War I veteran. He lived to be 95 years old. He served in France. And his son, oh, by the way, he was full-blooded German. His grandfather came over in 1866. His father was 4 years old when they came over. So he was the first one who served in the service, World War I. And then his son, my uncle, served in World War II. He was shot, left for dead, picked up later by German patrol because their name was Schaefer. He spent time in the POW hospital and was liberated in 45. He's still alive today.
My daddy was in World War I, also his brother. He died at 92 in 1988. But I grew up with the children of some that went overseas. The two Talbot brothers, Claude and Noble, they were gassed. And Austin Dunn was gassed and it got in his lungs. And it was only the West Point that I can't think of their names.
Yeah, a lot of the people who ended up getting caught in those gas attacks would either, develop a lot of breathing problems later on in life, or tuberculosis, as in the case of Herman Davis. There were several that were blinded by the gas. So it was some nasty stuff. We have some, at the History Commission, we have a lot of World War I artifacts, and one of the things we have is a gas mask.
I carried one with Patton Garment,
How did you?
just in case.
Just in case.
I had my granddad's gas mask when I was a kid, and I played with it so much, it wore out. I still had it.
This doesn't have to do with World War I, but it tells you all about how we cook in White County. I didn't check your thing, but I don't know if you're married or not. Otherwise,
Thank you, thank you. Oh, by the way, I've got some things here, some freebies, if anybody wants. I've got some bookmarks up here. I've got some of these posters, if anybody would like a poster to take home with them. Has a lot of the Arkansas governor's signatures here at the bottom. So those will be up here.
We appreciate that, and we'll have I really can't brag on the History Commission enough. If you haven't been, go to the state capitol, go behind it. On the right behind is what they call Big Mac. You go on past it, and there's parking back behind for visitors. You walk in the downstairs of Big Mac, go in from the very west end, and their collection is phenomenal. They're very helpful. I think you're the first speaker we've had up here since probably 20 years ago, Russell Baker came up. So it's been a while since we've had a visitor from the History Commission. But
He's retired since then.
he's retired since then, but I think he's still down there a bunch.
Oh,
isn't he?
sure.
Yeah, so he's on hand. Pardon?
Oh, that's right. She said she had been here.
Oh, that's right. Well, I don't think of her that way, but you're right. Okay, we better do our drawing right quick.
Oh, one more thing.
Yeah.
I have a sign-up sheet if anybody is interested in receiving our monthly newsletter. Just put your name and email address up here, and we'll put you in the system.
I'm not sure I can read the name right. Jared Dockery?
That's me.
Oh, okay, Jared. You get to learn, you also get a cookbook tonight. We appreciate your coming.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next month, Bob Lambert, who was Lambert Terrace, western part of what's now nearly downtown Searcy. Family farmed there, and of course that's how Lambert Terrace got its name. His family was very instrumental in early agriculture development, and his grandmother was key to the start of the they no longer call it the home demonstration clubs. I'm using the old name. It's extension service clubs now, I believe. Anyway, home demonstration clubs is the term I prefer to use. And he'll be talking about the early history. If you know anyone that's home demonstration club oriented, or if you are, well, feel free to join us. And it'll be on the fourth Monday, which is happening close to Thanksgiving, but it'll all work out. So, any other announcements that I forgot?
Don't forget the flyers.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, flyers for Pioneer Village on this thing. So, well, we thank you for coming, and we will see you next month.